Hi, everyone. I'm Rick Hanson, and I'm here with Vidyamala Burch, a friend of mine, and also one of the world's leading experts on what people can do when they're grappling with pain, particularly physical pain. And this has come out of Vidyamala's own personal story. Born in New Zealand, very athletic, really enjoyed being in the outdoors. And then late in her teens, around 40 years ago, she suffered a very serious injury that left her with a great deal of pain to grapple with. And she'll be telling us some of those details along the way. And so I hope I don't mangle any of her personal history. And then out of that extraordinary crisis, I suspect Vidyamala was grappling with pain that I've just never personally experienced whatsoever. Probably many people haven't experienced either. On the basis of that, facing her own dark night of the soul and her own fire, like the phoenix, she arose out of it and started finding ways to help other people grapple with serious pain. She's written 3 books so far. I'll read a bit from her bio. Around 20, where am I here? Around 2000, completely confused. Her
2014-ish.
But there we go. 2008. She wrote Living Well with Pain and Illness, The Mindful Way to Free Yourself from Suffering. She then in 2014 with Danny Penman wrote a bestseller, Mindfulness for Health, A Practical Guide to Relieving Pain, Reducing Stress, and Restoring Well-Being. That was its title, I believe, in the British Commonwealth. In America, that title was You Are Not Your Pain. It's kind of American style, cut right to the chase. Sell a lot of hotcakes. Anyway, this book, by the way, won first prize in the British Medical Association Book Awards in the popular medicine category, clinical books aimed at the general public. I can personally say that Vidyamala's books are gold standard books for information, news, and tools, ideas and tools that are aimed at a general reading audience, but are very solidly grounded in science, and also infused with a profound lovingness and wisdom. And that's no small thing. Most recently, Vidyamala wrote in 2016,
Mindfulness for Women.
Mindfulness for Women, written with Clara Irvin. Declutter your mind, simplify your life, and find time to be. Vidyamala's website is www.breathworks-mindfulness.org.uk. We'll put that link in the information about this interview. I'll say it again, www.breathworks-mindfulness.org.uk. And that's a portal where you can find much more information about her. Okie doke. So Vidyamala, thanks for putting up with my lurching bio of you. And I really appreciate you very much for doing this with me.
Well, it's absolutely brilliant to be here with you, Rick, and thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and great to connect with you again.
Oh yeah, when I met you, Vidyamala, I thought immediately, this person's amazing, and I want to help other people to get to know you as well. So let's dive in. There's a question I ask just about everybody. The focus of this interview is about developing inner resources for various purposes. And so for you personally, why has it been important to cultivate yourself, to develop yourself in deliberate ways over the course of your life? Why does that matter to you?
Well, it's been very simple. It's been a matter, in a way, of life and death. Now, I don't mean that completely literally, but almost literally, I think, that my physical suffering was so intense that it was driving me mad. You know, I was on the edge of madness in a particular moment, which I'll talk about a bit later on. And I was lucky enough when I was in hospital that the hospital chaplain came to see me. This was way back in the 80s in New Zealand. I didn't know, I wasn't religious at the time. I didn't know why this guy was coming to see me. But I think the medical team really didn't know how to help me. I had these injuries. There wasn't going to be a medical magic cure. I was going to have to learn to live with it. So they sent this guy to see me. I was quite skeptical, of course. Very, very lovely guy, very gentle, kind, older man. He took my hand and he did a visualization practice with me. So he asked me to remember a time and a place where I've been happy. So I took my mind back to the Southern Alps of New Zealand, where I had been ecstatic prior to my injuries. I'd been very athletic. I'd been a mountaineer of sorts. I mean, I was still very young, but I loved climbing mountains in the Southern Alps of New Zealand. So he asked me to take my mind and to a time and a place of happiness. Took my mind to the Southern Alps. Maybe 10 minutes later, he brought me back to the present. Same girl, same hospital bed, same body, and yet I felt profoundly different by what I'd done with my mind. And that was a complete moment of awesomeness. It was like, oh my God, I have this quality of attention, and depending on what I do with that quality of attention, my subjective experience can change. So from that point onwards, I've been really, really interested in, well, what is this awareness? And how can I train this awareness? And how can I learn to use awareness to improve my psychological well-being and my quality of life?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So we're going to talk about this, training awareness and training in what you do with what is held in that awareness, I assume.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I mean, prior to that point, I'd never considered that I had a mind. I was just alive. I was just alive, going about my life, and I was completely identified, I guess, with all the content of my mind. So if I was angry, I was anger. If I was sad, I was sad. If I was sad, I was sadness. If I was in pain, I was the pain. So in that moment, there was an awakening that my mind was something that I could attend to in and of itself. And I could learn to train my mind to separate isn't quite the right language because it sounds like a cutting off, but I could learn to step back from being completely consumed by my experience.
Yeah.
And then I could choose how I use that quality of awareness. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it was mind blowing. I had a mind and it was mind blowing.
Well, that's wonderful. And factually, that realization for you has ended up serving so many people. We're going to get into some of the practical details of that in a moment. So we all experience pain in a variety of ways, both physical and emotional. And as many wise people, including saints and sages, have pointed out, living means sometimes suffering, as you well know. It's not that the whole of life is suffering, but that there's some suffering in it. And for some people, a lot of it. You've had to deal with a great deal of physical pain yourself, probably some emotional pain as well. I consider you a preeminent expert on tools for dealing with pain broadly. Plus, in my experience, you have a heart as big as New Zealand. So would you be willing to start? And I don't want to re-traumatize you here, of course. And I think that's really an important point, by the way, when we're talking with others about their own journey, to be really thoughtful about what our purposes are. Are they merely voyeuristic or ordinary curiosity, or is there some beneficial, selfless purpose behind it? I hope I have one here. So, with that said, feel free to talk about what you want to talk about and not what you don't want to talk about. How did your own journey begin? What was your own background? You're describing an injury, and then we'll take it from there.
Okay, thank you. I feel quite comfortable talking about this, so it's fine. Yeah, so we've already covered that I was brought up in New Zealand in the 60s. It was a great place to grow up, very safe, very outdoorsy, and I was very sporty. So that's of interest to the story, that my body, before I had my injuries, was a place that I was content. It worked for me. I was a tennis player. I was an athlete. And I was a mountaineer, as we've said, or a hill walker, as they say in England. So I took my body for granted. So that's quite interesting. I never really considered that this body that I had was extraordinary. It was just something that I lived and I dwelt in and I pushed. And it was in a way, it was a bit of a machine, I suppose. And it was a machine that worked very well for me. And then when I was 16, I was doing life-saving practice, ironically, at the swimming pool. And I lifted someone out of the swimming pool and my back started to hurt. So it wasn't a really dramatic injury. It was more an incipient onset of pain. And it turned out that I had a condition called spondylolisthesis, very long name. which is where one of your vertebrae fractures and your whole spinal cord shunts forward at that level. I had conservative treatment, including wearing a plaster cast. My whole torso was in plaster for several months. Now, of course, that's socially and emotionally very significant when you're a 16-year-old girl. So that was very difficult to deal with. And then I had a fusion operation at the beginning of my 17th year. Things went wrong, and I had another very big operation to clear up the mess. So I came out of my 17th year. In a way, it was quite devastating to everything, to my identity. I was no longer the super fit girl. I'd had my education interrupted. So I was going to go to university. I was going to be a vet. So I could be a forest ranger in New Zealand, a wildlife ranger, and have this life living in the wilds. That's what I wanted. All that had gone. I never went to university, and I've never done a degree because I lost a whole year of school at that point. And I had chronic pain. So here I was living with chronic pain. And my initial way I dealt with that was denial, which is very, very common. So I just tried to pretend it hadn't happened. I'm naturally quite willful, quite strivey. So I just kept on pushing. At that point, I was still walking. So, I mean, these days I use a wheelchair and crutches, but at that point I was walking. So it was an invisible disability. So I could pretend I didn't have it and hope that other people weren't going to ask me about it. So it was a sort of hot denial. Very, very unpleasant looking back, because you're at odds with the way things are all the time, trying to create a kind of parallel universe and then inhabit that, which is not going to work as a long-term strategy. And then when I was 23, I had the really bad luck of being a passenger in a car crash. So I wasn't driving. The driver went to sleep and drove into a telegraph pole on the open road. And I fractured the middle of my spine, completely stirred up all my other injuries, and got very bad whiplash. And you really don't want to get whiplash if you've got a fusion in your spine, because all the energy gets stuck in the body. Kept on pushing, kept on trying to pretend nothing was wrong with me. I was working 60 hours a week as a film editor, so overworking. Very good strategy if you're in denial. Just keep on pushing yourself through work. And then eventually, when I was 25, I reached a state of physical collapse.
You reached what again?
I reached a state of physical collapse. So the machine broke down. This machine that I've been driving broke down.
Yeah.
So in terms of my journey, there was one very significant moment after that. So I had some tests. I had some injections in my spine that went wrong because of all the damage. My bladder became paralyzed. Ended up in intensive care. And then I had a test where I was asked to sit up for 24 hours afterwards. I couldn't lie down for various medical reasons. Now, I hadn't sat up for months at this point, because when I collapsed, I really just went to bed for months. So I was being asked to do something that I couldn't do, which is really very interesting from a kind of mental point of view. So here I was in the middle of the night in this intensive care ward, lonely, bewildered, terrified. And I really thought I was going to go mad. So I had these two voices in my head, and one voice was saying, I can't stand this, I'm going to go crazy. And it felt very, very real, that option. And it was all about getting through till the morning, because in the morning I'll be able to lie down again. So then the other voice was saying, but you have to. But I can't stand this, I can't get through till the morning, but you have to. I can't, you have to. I can't, you will. And it got tighter and tighter and tighter. So it really felt like I was inhabiting this, it was like a hell realm with these voices just screaming in my head. And then another voice came in. It was so interesting. And to this day, I have no idea where that voice came from. But another voice came in that said, you don't have to get through till the morning. You just have to live this moment and this one and this one and this one. And my experience changed. So it went from being tormented, tortured, to being much more open and spacious. Now, I would be lying to say that, I went into a state of bliss or anything. I was still a completely confused young woman lying in a hospital bed. But there was a significant shift. And of course, I did get through till the morning, and I was profoundly changed. I always say that moment is the kind of axis that my life is turned upon. So I got through to the morning with massive big questions. What is time? What is space? And who am I? Huge questions that have really changed my life. And this direct experience that we only live life one moment at a time. And I spent the next 30 odd years trying to make sense of that and trying to unpack that and trying to learn, how do I live like that? How can I live completely present and not caught up in worrying about the past or worrying about the future?
We'll just end right now. We've just gone all the way, but we will keep going. Just a little question. Did that happen for you? Was that after you had that experience with the chaplain, being able to step back from your mind and witness it?
No, what was interesting, so I had 4 experiences when I was in the hospital that were very significant. The first one was that night, where I felt completely changed, and it's like time and space unraveled completely, and it's like, oh my God, I can live life completely differently. And then there was one day when I woke up and I felt very sort of, I'll say thin. I don't mean physically thin, but I felt my hold on life was very, very thin. And I remember looking out the window. I was in a high-rise ward, looking out the window at Auckland and thinking I could die. Quite a strong sense that I could just let go and die. And a really strong question, did I want to or not? And I decided that I didn't want to. And since then, I feel like I've been choosing life in a way that I've never before. I was just alive because I was alive. But that moment, I felt like I really actively thought, no, I do want to keep going, even though I knew it was going to be a very tough road, very, very tough road to come back from this state of complete depletion. Another insight around that time was around responsibility, because it gradually dawned on me, I was a bit horrified to discover, there was not going to be a person in a white coat who was going to fix me. There was no medical solution for my situation, and it was going to be down to me. And again, I made a decision, yes, I would take responsibility for my health and well-being and my mental states. Prior to that, I never had. I've been quite reckless, very reckless with my body and my mind, and always assumed that someone else would fix me up. And it was like, oh my God, there's nobody there. It's going to be down to me. And I made a choice, yes, okay, I'm up for that. And then I had the experience with the chaplain. So they're all kind of interrelated experiences around mind, time, space, being present, being awake, being alive, and taking responsibility.
One thing I'm struck by just listening to your story in depth here that I've never heard before is the moment in which we face the magnitude of suffering. And we're talking here about facing it inside oneself, but certainly often we face it with other people. We hear a story, I'm facing your suffering, and I'm just kind of, wow. And there's that pause where you just face it and recognize it. And one, that's important, I think, to receive the suffering of oneself or to receive it in others, to not turn away.
Yes.
I've reflected often from, I asked a friend and teacher of mine, Gil Fronsdal, once, what he did in his own personal practice. And he paused, reflected, he said, I stopped for suffering.
I what, sir?
I stop for suffering.
Okay, interesting.
Like at a stop sign. Like I stop for suffering, to be with it, to recognize it, to honor it. And that leads me to think about some recent translations, recent scholarship about the common translation in Buddhism of the Four Noble Truths. So we have the noble truth of suffering, the noble truth of the cause of suffering, and so forth. The recent translation is perhaps more accurate to say the ennobling truths. And I've reflected about the ways that it can be ennobling in some wholesome, healthy sense to face suffering in oneself and to face suffering in other people. I think it's been ennobling for you. I can say that about you as I know you, to grapple with this. So contrasting then to the opportunity, not to say that we would choose the suffering or that we would wish it on others, but given that there is suffering, there are ways to relate to it that in a broad and meaningful sense can be ennobling, among other things. But before we get into the ennobling part, and also just the down and dirty practical, how do you get through a day feeling the way you feel part, can we talk first of all, what have you seen about ways that are problematic, that people either push away the suffering, not so ennobling, or they try to cope with it, but in ways that are problematic? What should people steer away from? Yeah. Then we can get into what they should steer toward.
Well, it's interesting that in my observation in my own life and the many people that I've taught, resistance is the main problem. It's not actually the pain. I mean, I've got unpleasant sensations in my back right now. I've always got unpleasant sensations in my back and in my legs. I can actually live with those. They are just that. They're unpleasant sensations. They're unpleasant. I don't like them, but they're not particularly charged in and of themselves. They're just, you know, like we have hot and cold and taste. These are sensations. And it seems that what we do as human beings is if we're not mindful and we haven't got some kind of training of our awareness, we automatically resist. So we close down around those unpleasant sensations because we don't like them. So we have a mental and emotional physical response of, I don't want this. I don't like this and I don't want this. Totally understandable. But of course, it's not that great a strategy, because then that leads to all kinds of what we call secondary suffering. So you end up with way more suffering because you got this go away, I don't want it. You end up with mental states like catastrophic thinking patterns. It's going to go on forever. I can't bear it. It's too much. Emotionally, you get fear, anxiety, depression. And physically, very interestingly, you get loads of secondary tension. So then, for example, I've got unpleasant sensations in my back. If I have this, I don't want it, then I'll tend to hold against it, guard against it, hold my breath, and I end up with loads and loads of secondary tension. I may get headaches, I may get shoulder pain, and my back pain will get worse. I know it gets worse because I'm an expert at it. Resistance as well as everything else. I know every pitfall along the road. Yeah, and interestingly, what we've discovered is that the secondary suffering that arises on the basis of resistance, it tends to fall into two kind of categories of what I call blocking or drowning. So it seems that we either tip into denial behaviors. Let's just pretend it's not happening. Maybe addictions, I talked about overworking. So that's a way of pretending it's not happening. Yeah. So you may have addictions of all sorts. You might argue there's a kind of brittle quality around denial and blocking.
What do you mean brittle?
Sort of emotionally brittle. So I'm a blocker by nature. That's my dysfunction of choice. So it's a bit like I'm pretending it's not happening. I'm pushing, I'm striving, I'm doing. And it's like I get more and more away from my direct experience. I'm doing this kind of move. I'm sort of pulling away from my back. And then there's a kind of emotional brittleness that comes in. So I'm snappy, I'm irritable. There's a kind of fragile edge. There's not a sense of, there's no ballast. Yeah. So brittle in the sense of, like an eggshell is brittle. It's like you get a carapace.
Fragile but rigid but fragile.
Rigid but that's it. Yeah, rigid but fragile. Yeah, and then the other side is drowning, which is overwhelm. So then, with my back, it would be like the only thing in my life is my back, and it's completely awful, and it's ruining my life, and I'm not going to do anything, and I'm just going to go to bed. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that probably we're all doing one or other of these things most of the time, even if we haven't got extreme physical pain. We're either slightly kind of pulling away from our experience or we're falling into it. So we sort of tip between blocking and drowning. Some of us do it on a big scale. I mean, I'm because of my temperament, I can block for years. I mean, luckily I don't now. But in the past, when I was in my big denial phase, I kept that up for 10 years, unbelievably. And then I had a massive big drowning phase where I was just completely overwhelmed and bedridden. Yeah. Some people do it on a much more ladylike, gentle kind of cycle. You might block for a few hours and then feel overwhelmed. But I notice now, I've been practicing a long time, but I'm still working with these edges. So I'll notice the thought process of, I can't bear it. It was too much. Oh, I can't stand it. And then there'll be the thought process of, come on, pull yourself together. It's so interesting. But it's with mindfulness, you catch that much, much sooner, and you come back to the middle ground. And the middle ground is very simple. It's just drop into the body, drop into the moment, feel the sensations, full stop. Just let go of all that secondary stuff. Let go of the resistance and let go of all the secondary suffering, and just be with the present moment, which has a gorgeous simplicity when one begins to taste that. It's so uncomplicated. Yeah.
Great. Well, let's talk about how to do that. And you've developed, you have different kind of frameworks here. Breathworks, kind of an overarching umbrella, inside of which you have mindfulness-based pain management. People should know you've trained dozens, I suspect hundreds.
Hundreds, yeah.
Yep.
In over 25 countries now. We've got teachers in over 25 countries.
Yeah, and that's an interesting word you use, by the way, teachers rather than therapists or whatever, some other word. Teacher, helping people learn how to do this for themselves. So could you describe kind of the major features of your approach, particularly in terms of people who are watching or listening right now, who are grappling with pain? How could they use it? What could they start doing? How do you explain this?
Okay, yeah, good. So I've got a great little exercise that hopefully people will immediately understand. So I've talked about how the problem is mainly resistance. Yeah, so everything that we do is about learning how to soften resistance. So everything about our program is softening. Soften. Yeah. And when we resist...
I'm thinking you were such a hard-ass kid. Your journey has been to soften.
Well, that's what I've needed. Yeah. So, but when we resist, we hold the breath. It's very, very interesting. So let's do this little exercise together. So if you make a fist with one hand. And what's happened to your breath?
Oh, I noticed immediately I was holding my breath, and I thought, oh, wait, I'm holding my breath.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so now imagine directing your awareness into the fist. And what does the fist want to do? Yeah, so that's the whole program in a way. We've got lots and lots of different ways of approaching that, but the fist here is a metaphor for any kind of pain. And it could be physical, mental, or emotional. So generally speaking, when we have pain, there's a quality of contractedness. Pain tends to kind of draw in and contract. Yeah, that seems to be the nature of pain. So it's a bit like the fist is closing. And then not only have we got the contraction, but we've got breath holding. And we're not designed to hold our breath all the time. The physiology of the human body is such that the body is meant to breathe. If you look at a baby breathing, the whole body is quivering, isn't it? Before the baby's learned all kinds of patterns of holding. So it can be very, very profound, just to realize, oh, yes, that's what I do. I'm going through my whole life. I've got my pain. I'm contracting against it. I'm holding my breath. And guess what? That's unpleasant. And I've got secondary fatigue, secondary headaches, secondary bowel problems, maybe, all kinds of things. Yeah. So just noticing, are you doing that? And if you notice you're doing that, then breathe into that area of holding and contraction, just like we breathe into the fist. And there will be some kind of natural release around the pain. So that's just quite a nice little takeaway for people. But the whole program is built on that idea.
I want to ask you to elaborate on an instruction that people often give, which is to breathe into. So I'm thinking, okay, here's my fist. What do you mean breathe into my fist? I get it about applying awareness into my fist. And I also notice that when I bring awareness to the fist, I naturally begin to breathe again.
Yeah.
Right? I get that part.
Yeah.
But so let's say I actually do have a low back pain right now.
Yeah.
It's minor, but it's real. What do you mean breathe into it?
Okay, that's a really great question. So let's work with your back, shall we? Let's
Please help me.
Yeah. Okay, good. So what I'd like to do is
Two for one here.
Yeah. So drop your awareness to your bum on the chair, your feet on the floor. And before we go any further, just be curious. Ask yourself, is there any kind of contracting against the pain? Can you feel that you're sort of pulling back from the pain?
Yeah.
I mean, you've been meditating.
It's really quite mild.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So let's say you had noticed that you were, that you had a habit of kind of holding against. Then there'll be this kind of inhibition of breathing in the body. The whole body will be a little bit closed down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can feel that.
So what I mean by breathing into that area is just imagine that you're not literally breathing into your back, because you're literally breathing into your lungs. So that's, I think, where it can get confusing for people. They think, but my lungs aren't in my lower back. What's she talking about?
Yeah.
But so let's do something else. But when we breathe into the lungs, does the whole body move? Or is it just the lungs that move? That's a question. If you breathe into your lungs, when you breathe...
I'm aware of my whole body moving.
Exactly, yeah. So there's a kind of echo through the whole body when we breathe into the body, and a subsiding through the whole body when we breathe out. Now, if you've got this contraction going on, then that whole body, that sort of flow of the in-breath, will be blocked and inhibited around the area of holding. And that means this body that wants to kind of billow outwards can't do that because there's this guarding.
The ripples of sensation through
Exactly.
that region are blocked.
Exactly.
Holding. That's great. I never noticed that.
Exactly.
Very helpful. Yeah.
So then that's what I mean. So with the fist, when I did it, I'm not literally imagining my oxygen going into my hand.
Yeah.
But I'm allowing the ripple. I'm sort of breathing in fully, and I'm allowing this kind of ripple of openness to move down to the fist. And the fist really does want to express that. It wants to dance, if you like, with that movement of the breath.
Yeah. That's excellent. Very clarifying. Okay, great. Well, then keep going. Other things that people can do, or what's under the general heading?
Good. Yeah, good. So that's just a nice little take-home message for the watchers. Everything on the program is about working with this habit of resistance. So how can we accept with grace, with dignity, with kindness, with warmth, the unpleasant sensations?
Rather than resisting.
Yeah, how can we soften resistance? And then how can we allow all the secondary suffering to fall away? And it will just fall away, either completely or partially or momentarily, but there will be a sense of the mind kind of, and the emotions, and all the secondary tension in the body beginning to drop. And we do this through a number of methods. So it's an 8-week program. We've got a number of different meditation practices. So we start with a body scan, a breath-based body scan. So people are coming into the body and you're beginning to get a felt experience of, oh yeah, my body's really dynamic. It's not this lump that's hurting, but it's this incredibly fluid, dynamic creature. That's quite fascinating. And we're beginning to learn how to massage the discomfort with the breath. We do a breathing anchor, which is where we learn to work with thoughts. So this idea of looking at your thoughts rather than from your thoughts.
Did you say breathing anchor?
Breathing anchor. Anchor with my accent.
Like at a ship, a boat.
Yeah.
What's a breathing anchor?
Okay, so that's where you use the felt experience of breathing in the body as an anchor for the mind. So the mind goes off and you call it back. So you're using the felt sensations of breathing in the body as your primary object of awareness.
Yeah.
And the mind goes off, you notice it, you bring it back. Breathing. Mind goes off, you notice it, you bring it back. So it's a mind training practice. Yeah. Very traditional practice.
And it helps you disengage from these thoughts, let's say, that are hijacking you.
Exactly.
Your secondary suffering, and probably to some extent being involved in the implementation of the resistance.
Exactly. Right? Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And the mind goes to what it's interested in. This is very interesting. The mind will always go to what's grabbing its attention. So you're learning how to make the felt experience of breathing in the body more fascinating than your fantasies or your distractions or your worries. It's like, oh wow, how many sensations can I feel? How many parts of my body are moving? Is it rough? Is it smooth? Is it silky? Is it loud? Is it soft? Is it long? Is it short? So you're becoming really interested and fascinated by breathing, and then the mind is less likely to go down its old grooves.
Right. It's really counterintuitive because, of course, when there's pain, we tend to want to not feel pain, so we dissociate from the pain. We stop thinking about it, or we think about other things.
Yeah.
And we keep that trapdoor closed, and it seems to make sense
That's right.
at the moment.
Yeah.
Speaking from some experience here with emotional pain. And yet your approach and the approach of other great teachers is often to counterintuitively open the trapdoor, which actually changes your relationship to the pain. And pain becomes less of a dominant feature in your mind.
Yeah, it's all very counterintuitive and in a way quite hard to understand. It's like, well, why on earth would you want to go there? But, I would just say to people, how's it working for you not going there? And, people come in our programs because it's not working very well.
Yeah.
And they're just lost in all kinds of secondary suffering, or they've just reached the end of the road. So it's like, okay, you've got pain. Let's give you some tools to work with it authentically, honestly, and truthfully. And I think the reason why all this works is because it's aligning ourselves with, this is the reality. The reality is the body is hurting. You can try and cut off from it and pretend it's not happening, but that isn't really going to work as a long-term strategy.
Yeah. You're describing a middle way, or a third option between blocking and drowning.
Exactly. That's the whole program, a third option.
And what do you say to people who would say to you about their physical pain and related emotional pain, I just am white knuckling my way through the day, and I'm afraid that if I take one or two steps down the slippery slope of your method, all my carefully constructed defenses that enable me to just get through the day will be overwhelmed by this pain, and I'll drown for the rest of my life?
Okay, so I think that's a really great question. And this is where I think what's interesting about our program is it's come from the lab of my own experience. So it's come from the inside out. So I can totally identify with that question. So we don't say to people on week 1, okay, now we want you to get in touch with your pain. Why would we do that? That's cruel. So what we do is we say, we're just going to do a meditation practice now together. If you'd like to lie down on the floor, by all means do so. We'll help you down. You can do it sitting in a chair. Are you comfortable? Would you like a blanket? How's your pillow? Would you like an eye bag to rest your eyes? We tuck people in. We literally go around and tuck people in. Mm. So we're caring. There's a huge amount of love and care and kindness. So it's not, I suppose in this way, it's not a kind of intervention. It's not something that's being done to people to help them manage their pain better as a kind of thing, but it's a lived, loving, kind life jacket. It's like you're giving people a life jacket and saying it doesn't have to be so hard. Yeah. And then you do the body scan, and by the end of the body scan, people feel more embodied. But it's very interesting because it's quite mysterious. You don't quite know how that happened. So someone at the beginning might be thinking, I just can't go there. I don't want to go there. And then they do the body scan and they end up kind of drenched in body awareness in a way that's not scary.
Could you give us a short summary of what people who don't already know how to do this would do if they did a body scan?
Okay, yeah. So generally we encourage people to do it lying down, but you don't have to. You can do it sitting or even standing, or the position isn't important. Whatever's going to be most comfortable for you. And then the way I teach it is always very breath-based because of this breath-holding habit. So you get people comfortable, and then I give some instructions around gravity. And gravity, I think gravity is fascinating. So can you allow your body to rest into gravity? Because gravity is always drawing us down, always. Just the right amount of pull. It's so magical, isn't it, gravity? If there was more gravity, we couldn't move, and less gravity, we'd be floating off. But we've got this force in the universe that we can learn to live with rather than against. And people have got pain, they're very often pulling away from gravity. So there's all this kind of strain and exhaustion. So it's like, okay, just, can you give your weight up to gravity, drop the body, feel the points of contact with the floor. A few deeper breaths, a few longer out breaths. And then we start off at the belly. So put your hands on your belly if that's comfy. And just beginning to tune into those movements of breathing beneath the hand. Begin to feel that. And you're not watching it from the outside, but you're inhabiting it. So you're coming right inside the body and you're feeling these movements. Yeah. And straight away, that can be a huge shift for people. You know, if you're way up here just to drop down into your belly is that's a big deal. And it's gentle. It's also gentle and invitational and non-threatening. And then we move down into the pelvis, and then we go right up to the back of the body, because there's a lot of movement in the back of the body with breathing that people don't generally realize. So the ribs and the lungs are as much in the back as the front, which is, I find, incredibly intriguing. The lower back's moving, so you get the whole back being massaged by breathing, feeling those movements, feeling those sensations. Go down the arms, feeling inside the arms. I use language like allowing awareness to pour down into your arms, so your arms are saturated with awareness.
Yeah.
So it's all very kind of drenchy, embodied language. So it's not notice your arms or watch your arms, but come right inside your arms. Then we come back up the arms, we go through the head, the face, we soften at the back of the mouth. Because if you're holding your breath, chances are, or almost certainly, you'll also have a lot of tension around here. Yeah. So, and if you're tense here, you freeze your whole body. So it's very important to sort of relax the back of the mouth. And then we come back down to the hips and then down the legs. And then we broaden to whole body awareness, whole body breathing, whole body broadening a little bit on the in-breath and subsiding a little bit on the out-breath. And the pain is a part of that, but it's not all of that.
It's beautiful. I was feeling it as you were saying it and being drawn into your mind stream about it. Along with these methods that you're mainly describing in pretty physical ways, which is fine so far, wrapped around it, I'm picking up on perspectives, attitudes, emotions of kindness for oneself.
Yeah.
Maybe could you talk about some of those aspects that you've seen useful for people, or are also maybe embedded in your books or programs?
Yeah.
Those parts of the practice. Can you talk about what's useful there?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. So I've talked about the first two practices, the body scan, the breathing anchor. Then we do mindful movement, which are very, very simple. And the main training there is learning to move without gripping the breath. Without gripping the breath. Most of us, we hold the breath when we move.
Yeah.
And most of us use more energy than is needed for most activities. Yeah. Just next time you're driving the car, see what your grip on the steering wheel is like. Next time you're slicing a piece of bread. Do you slice bread in America? I guess you do.
Really cool people do. I'm lazy myself, but anyway.
Okay, so maybe not that, but okay, cleaning your teeth. That's always a good one. What's happening to your breath when you're cleaning your teeth like that? It's horrendous when you drop back in. Right. So, people can have an interest, a curiosity about breathing and effort. So the mindful movement is more a meditation practice, and we encourage people to go to another kind of rehab specialist if they need rehabilitation physically, because that's not our area of expertise.
Like a physical therapist?
Physio or whatever, or the gym, whatever it might be. Yeah. So our thing is mainly the quality of attention as you move, and then you can take that into the movements of daily life. And then we've got a whole mindfulness and daily life section, which I'll come back to in a moment. That's really important. But in terms of meditation, we have a self-compassion practice, which is all about how can I let kindness ride the breath. So we've already developed this whole awareness of breathing. And then you imagine that the breathing is absolutely saturated with kindliness and care towards yourself. So every breath, you're just being bathed in a tender, loving approach. And this is really where we're starting to edge closer to the pain, come closer and closer to, well, what is your direct experience, and how can we find this middle way between blocking and drowning? So we work with that in that practice. And then we have a treasure of pleasure practice. And so this is very interesting. This relates to your work, I think, that there's also the negativity bias. And we've got this tendency to focus on the difficult, but alongside the unpleasant, there's always the pleasant. So we're learning how to strengthen the seeking of pleasure and the cultivation of positive emotion. So learning how to find pleasure, enjoy pleasure, find joy, find happiness. So we've got a whole section just on that, which why I was so excited when I found your work, because I thought there's such a synergy there about cultivate the good, cultivate positivity. It's always there. even if you got awful pain. When I was in hospital having major surgery a few years ago, and I had a horrible infection, and it was just pretty horrendous. And I asked myself, what's pleasurable? And it was the clean sheets on the bed.
Yeah.
They were just beautiful.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have noticed that unless I'd really asked myself to bring in that aspect of attention.
Yeah.
And then my experience changed because I was focusing on the clean sheets of the bed, or I allowed that in, then my emotional experience changed from being all kind of tight. So we do the treasure of pleasure. Then we do open heart, which is about learning to live with flow. Everything's changing, everything's impermanent. So that's quite a sort of deep practice. And then very, very importantly, we do connection practice, which is we're not on this alone. We're not on this planet alone. How can you use your own deep self-awareness as a point of empathy with others? Yeah. Because I know what it's like to suffer. I know what it's like for you to suffer. Because I know what it's like to bring kindness to myself. I can hopefully know what it's like to be kind to you. And in some ways, I think the connection practice is in a way the most important. Like for me, going on a course which is just helping me manage my pain better, that would be great. But going on a course where I'm learning to take my place in humanity, well, that's of a different magnitude. Yeah. And learning how to be a kind, helpful, connected human being on this planet.
Did you say that's a different mac and cheese? That's great.
That's lost in translation.
It is a different macaroni and cheese, as it were.
That is lost in translation. Different magnitude.
No, magnitude. Yeah, very different. But yeah, very true.
Yeah, I think it was Churchill who said America and England are two countries divided by a common language.
Yeah.
So we got a very complete system there, which really works for people, and I think they've all got a place. But I'd just like to say a little bit about the mindfulness and daily life aspect, because that's very, very important. And we call it pacing. So in my own experience, I've had a daily meditation practice for decades. But for probably the first 10 years of practicing, I would still get into a pickle every day. Pickle, that's probably lost in translation. I get into a mess every day. So I'd meditate in the morning and I'd think, today's the day I'm going to be calm and mindful and kind. And then by about, 10 in the morning, I was stressed and anxious and holding my breath. So then I had another kind of crisis after about 10 years, and I thought, what is it that I haven't understood? And I thought, I really haven't understood how to take this practice into life, take it off the cushion. And it's not enough to meditate for even an hour a day if 12, 14 hours a day, one's blowing it. So we've now got, it's really quite a detailed module where we ask people to keep a diary for every single activity throughout the day for 7 days, and to score their pain at the end of that activity and how long they did that activity for. And it's only for a week. We don't want to train obsessives. It's just for a week. It's data gathering. Yeah, you're a detective. Then you analyze that and you immediately see patterns. So you have a column with all the things that made your pain worse, all the things that made no difference, and all the things that made your pain better. Straight away, lying down made my pain better. I could see that. And I could see that sitting aggravated my pain. Now, I kind of knew that, but seeing it in black and white was like, oh, okay, that's very clear. Then what you do is you go to the column of all the things that aggravated your pain, and you choose an activity that you see as problematic. Yeah, so for me, it was sitting. And you see, what's the minimum length of time you sat that week that caused an increase in pain? And for me, it was 20 minutes at that point. Even though other days I'd sat for an hour, and it hadn't made my pain worse, because we're variable creatures. So you go for the absolute minimum. Then you take about 80% of that and you start using a timer. Yeah, so I started using a timer for 16 minutes, and after 16 minutes, timer goes off and I would stand up, or I'd lie down, or I'd stretch my back in some way. Now, obviously, I'm not doing this now. I'm not modeling this now because I've been sitting here for ages. But generally speaking, if I'm working, I'll use a timer. And if I'm working on my computer, it goes off after 20 minutes, and I'll have a break, I'll have a stretch, maybe go and lie down, and then come back to my work. And for me, this is very interesting. That has been more life-changing than meditation. has brought that behavior change has improved my quality of life more than an hour of meditation a day. You know, what I used to...
points. One is just emphasizing the place of behavior change. And second, I have been worried about you because I know this about you. Do you want to stand up now?
I think I might. Yeah, that's a good idea.
Let's do that. I'll stand up too for my own back.
Okay, good.
Here we go. One,
Here we
2,
go.
3, up.
Oh,
Belly power.
So everyone gets to see our bellies.
That's it.
Yeah, so I'm glad you've suggested that.
Yeah. Well, I think too, should we sit down or you want us to keep standing?
I'm happy to sit down now.
Okay. I think a willingness to be ridiculous. I use that term really loosely, but just kind of like, whatever, man. I'm going to do what I need to do, and it's okay.
But you see what's... Yeah, but what's interesting...
Some of what you're saying here.
Absolutely, but that's where the meditation comes in, because I'm naturally quite shy, which might not be immediately obvious, but that's
pretty obvious.
Yeah. And so for me to give a keynote lecture and then say, you know, I'm going to stand up after 20 minutes and my timer goes off, I can do that now because I've been meditating and I built my confidence and my compassion and so on. But, you know, 20 years ago, that would have been unthinkable because I would have felt so shy and embarrassed and awkward. So that's where the things dovetail. The meditation training builds the confidence, builds the awareness, and then you get the courage to do ridiculous things and be different. Because if you've got a chronic pain condition or a disability, you can feel, you know, you want to fit in and be like everyone else, but the fact is you're not. Then how do you manage that?
No, when I met you, to me, given your natural shyness and modesty, what you've done with your life strikes me as more heroic than ever.
Oh, that's interesting.
I mean those words without flattery, just factually. And also, second, when I saw you do that stand-up thing in a posh conference, we were at this high-end therapist, mental health practitioner conference. I just thought how much it created permission for other people to do what they need to do.
Yeah.
And that's a real gift we can give to others, to just do what you need to do. It's really good. Good on you that you're doing what you need to do. Thank you from all of us for doing what you need to do, because it helps us and also models it for us.
Because, you know, we're not designed to sit slumped in chairs for hours on end. And yet we do that all the time. And when I do that standing up thing and get everyone else to stand up, I can just see this look of tremendous relief around the room.
Yeah, that's
like, oh, thank God, you know, someone's given me permission to get out of this uncomfortable chair.
Yeah. So, what do you do with people who, honestly, they're suicidal or they're in despair about it? You've had your own times. It's real. You're describing an approach, but even realistically with the approach, there's still often intractable conditions that people are stuck with, certainly not their preference. And when you use a word like unpleasant to describe pain, yes, that's the category, but on the 0 to 10 scale, it could be a 7 or an 8.
Absolutely. Yeah, it could be agony.
On unpleasant. Yeah. We're talking really hurting. Yeah. So when people hit that really, really dark place, what are some of the things that you offer to them?
I think the first thing I always do is just listen. Because it's so understandable. If it's really, really, really hurting, why would you want to go on? You know, it's so understandable, isn't it, to have a thought processes around, I just want this to end.
Yeah.
I mean, I've really, really had that myself. And so I don't feel shocked by it. Yeah. I don't think you shouldn't be having those thoughts. I think, well, yeah, that's very, very understandable to be having those thoughts. And simple human kindness. I just think kindness can't be emphasized enough in this work. You know, I really want people to know it's not a technique, it's not a thing, it's a human response to suffering in oneself and other people, and what we want, what we long for is a kind of tender heart, to be loved and kindness. So it's always to say, oh God, I know, I can really understand. This is awful, and I mean, even the words sound all wrong saying them now, but it's much more that human connection of, yes, I get that.
So what can people do themselves from the inside out when they're in that place themselves, which you've been through yourself?
Okay, so I think it's this big insight I had about one moment at a time. That's the main thing. It's just this moment, and this one, and this one, and this one. And that's a very different experience from the mind racing off into, I'm going to have to bear this for another 20 years, or it's not fair, I've had it for 20 years. Actually, the only moment you experience this pain is now, and now, and now, and now, and now, and now. So it's trying to reel everything back to now. And of course, as I've been describing, when you do that, you come very close to your experience. The pain isn't everything. There will be something else there. There will be some touch on the clean sheets on the bed, or the light through the window, or looking at your loved one, or the flowers in the room, whatever it might be. Yeah. And of course, it's very delicate, because it isn't like you reach for those things to take you away from your experience, because then you just got more contraction and it's kind of grasping mind, and that's not going to help. But it's the same, it's the softening, but the main thing is it's just this moment. That's the main thing I always say to people. It's just this moment, and this one, and this one, and this one, and what else is there in your experience right now?
How could a person guide themselves, be with themselves, to avoid the sense of this eternal moment of agony? Right?
Well, yeah. Well, I think as I'm saying, it's a sort of felt thing. But when I talked through the body scan before, that's the sort of thing we can do. So we're, rather than being the story of my agony, because that's often what happens. It's, you have the experience, and then there's a story of that experience laid on top. So you just come inside the body, come inside sensations, and you realize then when you come very close and you examine this agony, this thing you're calling agony, it's not a thing. It's not a thing. It's a flow of sensations. It's not solid. But what we do is we turn it into the enemy, this thing that's ruining my life. I can't bear it, and I can't stand this one more moment. Come close, come inside it. Feel inside that inherent dynamicness of all experience. And begin to unravel that knot just a tiny, tiny bit. Just a tiny, tiny bit. And is this moment exactly the same as the previous moment? No, it isn't. There will be something slightly different. So it's a bit like you go really way inside. Sometimes the image I get, there's a kind of metaphor. You know, in a lot of spiritual traditions, we talk about the blue sky of the mind, so the blue sky. Now, as a human being living in this world, we think of the blue sky as being up there, don't we? You know, the blue sky is above us, because that's what we see. But sometimes I experience it like I go so far inside my body, inside my cells, that's where the blue sky is. So as you go so far inwards and you soften, flow, open, and then there's this opening. Now, I'm not talking about, a huge, expansive blue sky. You probably won't experience that. But there'll be some tiny, tiny little opening. Yeah. And another image, which I quite like, I think it's good. In some European castles and stuff, you have these big tapestries on the wall. I don't know do you have them in America anywhere? Probably in museums. So you have it looks like a scene, and it's made out of threads, but it looks solid. If you stand on the other side of the room, you look at it and you think there's an image of this big hunting scene or something, and it looks like a thing. Now, if you got really close to that, you begin to see it's made up of all these threads. There's red threads and blue threads and red threads. And then imagine if you got closer and closer and closer, and you realize that there's a tiny, tiny little space between the threads.
Exactly, yeah.
And then what you're doing is you're resting your awareness in the space between the threads of the story of your pain. And that's very different from on the other side of the room thinking, oh my God, that thing over there is completely unbearable.
And to get to that space between the threads, you've got to get very close to the threads.
You do. Yeah. And you do that through things like body scanning, breath-based body scanning. You don't do it by thinking, right, I'm going to go in there, with a crowbar,
Yeah.
because that is not going to work.
And that space itself of awareness, let's say, is not pain.
It's not pain, exactly. That's very good. Yeah, it's awareness.
Yeah.
And
I'm
it's
thinking
not.
of a quotation from Pema Chodron. She says, "You are the sky. Everything else is weather."
Great. Exactly. That's it. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And as I'm saying, that the danger with taking that too literally is thinking I'm going to go out of my body up to the sky.
Right.
And that's really tempting. If you've got a painful body, you think, great, just press the ejector button and I'll send my awareness up to the sky. Believe me, I've done that. I did that for years, and it kind of works while you're meditating, but then you crash land back in your body afterwards.
Yeah.
And there's usually so much.
Spiritual bypass. It's kind of a bypass.
Yeah. And the thing is, you've got this body that hurts. So, okay, you need to find the blue sky in the body. And I like that image of the tapestry. That's always really worked for me.
Yeah, that's a lovely one. I'm struck by the use of the metaphor of disentangling.
Yeah.
You start opening up the thread so they're less knotted,
exactly,
and you start seeing the space in between them more and more.
Yeah. And I think from a sort of neurological point of view, everything that we're doing, now I'm losing your take on this, but everything we're doing is stimulating the parasympathetic. Because people with pain, I think we tend to be a bit the sympathetic is overactive. There's adrenaline in the system, there's cortisol in the system, we're a bit worked up. It's stressful. It's very, very stressful. Yeah. So everything we're doing is trying to kick in the parasympathetic. And then, of course, you get the natural endorphins, which is really interesting. So you're stimulating your natural painkillers.
Yeah. We're going to unfortunately need to finish pretty soon. So this topic right there is a nice segue into, as someone who works intensively with mental factors, aimed in part at changing the physiological processes in your own body, such as the parasympathetic wing of the nervous system. How do you observe or recommend that people work with these mental trainings, using the term broadly, along with more conventional physical interventions like medication or ice packs or physical therapy or a not Ben Yell method or what have you? So
well, I really appreciate you asking that question, because it's so important, because often people misunderstand it and think that if you're practicing mindfulness, it's a kind of complete path and you don't need any other approaches. I'm terribly pragmatic myself, and I just think do anything that works. Why would you not do a physical therapy if it's helpful? So I see all the work that I'm doing as complementary as opposed to alternative. I think modern medicine is remarkable. It's remarkable, modern medicine. So there's many things that we can use to help us in our journey. So speaking for myself, I do take pain medication. And I think that's really important for people to know that. It's not that I've got to some place where I don't need to take drugs, but I take way less than doctors would expect somebody with my condition to take.
Yeah.
But what I've learned is if the pain is really out of control, it's much harder to work with my mind. So I take enough medication to give me some kind of flexibility mentally.
Yeah.
And the sort of pain that I get is neurological pain. So if I don't take my medication for that, I don't get any sleep. I've just got like ants crawling around in my feet and legs all night long, and electric shocks, and it's pretty ghastly. So I take the medication, I can get some sleep, my body's more healthy because I'm sleeping, my mind is a little bit less, my mind's a bit dulled by the drugs, I know that, but it will be in a much, much worse state if I didn't take the drugs, because there's just this kind of affliction, I suppose, and physically that's really staying the mind. So I think medication does play a part, but ideally you get to a point where you're taking the minimal amount for your condition.
Yeah.
And then alongside that, I have quite a big regime of management strategies. So I do my stretches every single day. to keep myself flexible. I'm really quite flexible for my condition.
Yeah.
I swim, so I'm getting some cardiovascular exercise. And it means that the kind of athletic side of me can get a little bit of an outing. I don't swim a long way. You know, I used to swim until I couldn't swim anymore. And then I'd have a massive big flare up. So now I always do more than 10 lengths and I never do more than 20 lengths. Which, you know, I'm a good swimmer, so that's quite modest for me.
Yeah.
But I do that regularly. I see an osteopath once a month, just for an MOT. I just go and he kind of tunes me up and it's brilliant. I have acupuncture and massage once a week. I take supplements with, you know, vitamins and so on. I've had surgery. I've had unsuccessful surgery, but the last operation that I had has really, really helped.
Yeah.
It was really major surgery. It was risky, but I decided to take the risk and it has really helped. And I'm really glad that I did that. I'm really glad that I didn't think, you know, I don't want anything to do with conventional medicine. I just work on this with my mind. Yeah. Because actually, you know, this guy, he was a brilliant surgeon and he's really helped my back. What else do I do? I meditate. I value my friends. I try to have love in my life. I try to have happiness, maybe not happiness. I try to have fun. That's probably more, you know, I try to have a lightness about my life.
Why did you step away from the word happiness?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I was wondering that myself. Because sometimes I think if I want to be happy as a kind of end in itself, it can get in the way. But if I want to have laughter, if I want to try to cultivate a lightness of heart, then happiness will come along quite naturally. So happiness is a kind of byproduct of lightness. So I really value lightness. And there's an interesting little aside here. The retreats that we do for people who've been through our program, they're some of the most joyful. Some of the most joyful retreats that I do.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. It might sound all a bit heavy, you know, turning towards your pain and mindfulness of pain, but the outcome is a real lightness of heart. Because it's like people get out of prison. You're getting out of the prison of the mind. Yeah. So anyway, just to summarize, I have a whole array of things that I do in addition to mindfulness. And I know I'm privileged. I can afford these things, but I need a very simple life. I don't go out hardly. I don't spend money on clothes, but I will spend money on these other things. So they're top of the list. That's the point I'm trying to make. They're kind of, I would go without many, many things before I would go without my acupuncture and my osteopathy.
Yeah.
So it's very important. I don't want people to think that I'm saying this is instead of all the other things that are out there that can be helpful.
Yeah.
It's in addition to all the other things that are out there that can be helpful.
Yeah, it's very clear. Very clear. Well, finishing up, I'd like to ask you a question I also tend to ask people. What's your own personal growing edge these days? What are you developing? What are you trying to help yourself learn? People ask this question differently. What are you trying to help yourself grow into these days? What are you working on?
Okay, so it's an image again, or a kind of symbol. I'm trying to grow into being a warrior with a soft heart.
Wow.
Oh, not a warrior. It's always difficult. Not a warrior, but a warrior. A warrior. And that's because I find that's such an interesting balance, like to be courageous and bold and step over my fear, because I'm, fear and shyness have been a big thing I've worked with in my life. To step over that, but to not get tight and pushy and brittle, but to remain soft. Because softness can imply that one's kind of, you're not bold. If you're soft, you're not bold. But I think, how can one be both? How can one be bold and courageous and yet soft and tender?
Really touching. Could you give a kind of a concrete illustration of being warrior-like softly, or warrior-like with soft heart, enacted in the moment, woven together?
Okay, so what I'm getting is a sort of felt experience that it's being warrior-like, but bringing my pain with me. So I've been willing to kind of say, you know, my pain's really bad today, or I need to lie down, or I need to have a break, whilst I'm in a situation that's quite, you know, I'm trying to also grow into, and I'm trying to grow into my confidence, and I'm trying to be strong, but to also have my pain with me, you know, like a soft creature that I'm bringing with me, that I'm looking after. Because very often if I'm getting the felt sense, if historically, if I think back to how I used to be, when I was trying to be courageous and strong, I would push my pain away. I wouldn't bring my pain with me. And then I'll be a bit sort of edgy. I mean, maybe in this interview, I guess I've tried to be a warrior with a soft heart.
Yeah.
You know, I've tried to, you know, have the pain in the room while I'm talking to you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. What a contribution to others. Vidyamala Burch, founder of Breathworks and mindfulness-based pain management, author of 3 books so far, a bit more coming. People can find out more about you at your website, breathworks-mindfulness.org.uk. I can say for myself that I've learned a lot and been affected a lot just hanging out here with you.
Well,
I really appreciate you doing this, Vidyamala. It's going to help a lot of people. Thank you.
Well, it's been a real joy and privilege. You know, I found it very touching and enjoyable talking to you and hanging out with you.
That's great.
And maybe even this is exemplifying what I'm saying. It's a heavy subject, and yet we've been quite light. Yeah. So that's the journey. Yeah. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and I really hope it helps people.